Hey, what's up, life designers? Welcome to part 3 of this 3-part series on practical intuition. In part 1, we spent time defining what we mean by practical intuition. And then in part 2, we made the case for the existence and the importance of intuition. This week in part 3, we are going to look at the ways to cultivate our intuition in order to make it more useful in our day-to-day lives. So if that sounds interesting to you, then stick with us because we are going to jump right in. When it comes to developing intuition, there are two primary obstacles, two categories of obstacles that we need to overcome. The first is our beliefs, and the second is our knowledge. What we believe about intuition is a major factor in our ability to develop it. To the extent that we don't believe that intuition exists, or we believe that we personally lack intuition, we are going to have a much more difficult time exercising and developing our intuition. The reality is that we are going to miss many of the signals, or we are going to ignore them outright when our intuition is trying to tell us something. So if you find yourself in this category of disbelief, then I definitely recommend that you go back and rewatch parts 1 and 2 and really explore the edges of your beliefs. Notice the ways, as you watch those other videos, notice the ways that I've tried to frame intuition as something very, very logical and very practical, and not necessarily something that needs to be mysterious or mystical. Now, the other obstacle to intuition is our knowledge of how to recognize when our intuition is trying to tell us something, or our knowledge of how to better attune to the signals that our intuition may be trying to give. We are going to spend the rest of this week's video discussing the ways that we can add to our knowledge base in order to cultivate and improve our own intuition. The first thing that we want to do with regards to increasing our knowledge is to really get a deep appreciation, what I would call a current state assessment of our intuition. I recommend that you start keeping an intuition journal. Now, in this journal, you are going to make note every time that you feel like your intuition is trying to tell you something. Every time you get some kind of a signal, whether it be a strong signal or perhaps a very subtle signal, make note of it. Write down just a couple of sentences in your journal. Write down what were the circumstances, what was happening, what type of signal did you receive, what did you do? Did you follow the intuition, or did you somehow not follow it and perhaps convince yourself to ignore it? And then, of course, noticing how things turned out. You make a record of, did whatever action I chose, did it prove to be the quote unquote the right answer or the most favorable response in that situation? The goal here is to keep a really accurate log of all of the things that could be considered intuition as they occur in your day-to-day life. And if you haven't guessed already, the point of creating this intuition journal is to raise your awareness. Really bring your intuition and the signals of your intuition, bring them to the forefront of your awareness. And then by writing them down, you'll have an objective account of what occurred. And then you'll have a historical record that you can go back and look at over time and notice the patterns that may emerge from your regularly occurring intuitive signals. I also recommend that you look back at your past and notice the times when you had some kind of an intuitive signal, but you did, or in some cases, perhaps you did not listen to those particular signals. try to remember as much as you possibly can about each instance and write these details down as well. What was happening at the time? How exactly did your intuition speak to you? Was it in the form of a thought that popped into your head? Was it in the form of a voice that popped into your head? Perhaps you even found yourself waking up in the middle of the night, multiple nights in a row, with a recurring dream, or just waking up with a thought that popped into your head. Our bodies tend to have different ways of signaling us when our intuition would like to be heard. Now, the key here with this looking back at the past is, again, to raise your awareness, but more importantly, in this case, to notice the patterns. What is your body's way of telling you that your intuition wants to be heard? Each person has different modalities, if you will, of hearing their own intuition. And by looking at your past, you can get a sense of what your typical patterns are under different circumstances. Now, as you reflect back and journal about these past experiences, you want to also look very closely at what you did in the situation, or in some cases, what you didn't do. These reactions are also part of your personal pattern. Did you, upon hearing the intuitive signal, did you convince yourself that your intuitive signals were wrong, using some kind of logical thinking, or perhaps some kind of wishful thinking? Did you wish the intuitive signals to go away or to be wrong? Or perhaps your pattern, rather than dismissing your intuitive signals, perhaps you are the type of person who just immediately goes full bore into the situation. As soon as you get an intuitive signal, you just basically jump on it. And, oftentimes perhaps you find yourself on the wrong side of a particular decision because you're so quick to follow your intuition, when in certain cases perhaps a bit more judgment, a bit more critical thinking might be in order. Again, the key here is to notice your particular pattern, your particular tendencies, because then you'll be able to more skillfully predict and predict the future, of course, how you will react, but also to notice it when it's happening, which will give you the opportunity to really make the most effective decisions regarding your intuition. Speaking personally, in my case, my tendency is to ignore my intuition. Often my intuition comes to me in the form of a flash of a thought, a thought that just pops into my head when I'm dealing with a complex situation. And then that thought refuses to go away. It's not something that I'll just think about all the time, but that thought will reemerge over and over again. And when this happens, I know that is one of my intuitive signals, whether it be something like a bad investment or a bad relationship that I allow myself to get into, that on some level perhaps I really want to work out. I want this investment to be a good one. I want this relationship to work out. My pattern is that I logically kind of talk my intuition out. I basically talk myself out of, my body is telling me, or my thoughts are telling me, bad idea. But on some level, I convince myself to move forward anyway. And as I look over my history, those moments of override have gotten me into a bit of trouble. And that is my particular pattern. So now I'm much more acutely aware of my intuition telling me something, and then I notice my pattern of wanting to override it. So the question here is, what are your patterns? What are your preferences regarding your intuition? Write those down in your journal. Every intuitive signal, every case of intuition has some connection with our body. Our bodies are constantly sensing and storing and signaling. Our body is an incredibly evolved machine. Now, the problem is that most of us are walking around as if our body is a complete stranger to us. We need to get better at listening to our body, paying attention to what is happening beneath the surface. We need to feel rather than to merely think. Now, this may sound strange to you, this notion of feeling rather than thinking. They may feel like the same thing to you, but they're not. And you can get a sense of this. You can experience this right now. Simply close your eyes and turn your attention inward. Start at your feet, at the tips of your toes, and move upward in your body as if you are doing a full body scan. Notice whatever there is to notice at each part of your body. Is there tension? Is there heat? Is there pain? Is there pressure? Is there a tingling sensation in any particular part of your body? And just move along from part to part until you get all the way up to the top and you've scanned your entire body for these different sensations. Now, as you do this exercise, notice your inclination to label whatever you are feeling with something that is complex. For example, I feel fatigue. Fatigue is a complex thought. Fatigue is our brain interpreting our experience. It's telling us, oh, you're feeling a sensation, and that sensation is mostly associated with being tired. So you're feeling fatigue. When in reality, if you look really closely, if you look really discreetly, you will be experiencing, something more visceral, something more fundamental and basic, a tingling or a pressure. Something will be happening in the muscles that really are the signal to you that it is fatigue. We need to get better at noticing the primitive feelings because our intuition will sometimes show up as one of those really basic bodily signals, like a tension someplace in our body. That can often be a really good pre-indicator that our intuition is trying to speak to us. So overall, one of the best ways to cultivate and to bring your intuition to a more practical, useful state is to get more attuned to our body and to really notice on a regular basis what is happening inside of our body and getting out of our head and bringing our awareness into the full spectrum of our existence. As you can probably tell, we are really only scratching the surface of a very complex and, in my mind, a very interesting topic. And honestly, there's a lifetime of experimenting and learning that we can do with just the little nuggets of information that I've shared in the last 3 videos. Now, that said, I do want to offer you a few more opportunities to deepen your learning, to deepen your exploration of intuition even further. The first recommendation or suggestion that I'll offer is a book called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. This is a classic book. I think it's the book that I've given as a gift more often, well, for sure, more often than any other book. I've probably given away at least 50 copies of this book. I believe that The Gift of Fear should be required reading for everyone. This book talks about how our intuition provides us information that is critical to our physical safety and our physical well-being. And it also talks about the way that our brain often overrides our intuitive signals in a way that's very unhelpful, in a way that's very dangerous. But this book is a particularly good one if you are having a little bit of trouble connecting with this idea of our body and our body's role in the intuitive process, because this book has a very practical and pragmatic way of helping you recognize bodily signals in very common situations, and it will help you to translate the bodily signal into an intuitive signal. So it's really useful on that level as well. If you happen to be more interested in intuition from a creative or an artistic perspective, there's a couple of books I would recommend on that front. The first one is a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's an incredible book for cultivating your creativity, but also for cultivating your intuitive element of your creativity. And the second book that I would recommend on kind of the more artistic side is a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he talks to great lengths about the intuitive process, which he calls the muse. So the intuitive process is critical for any kind of artistic or creative endeavor. And if your interest happens to be kind of more professional, more business related, the classic book that I would recommend is by Daniel Kahneman, and the book is called Thinking Fast and Slow. That will be the book for you if your interest is more kind of professional in a business context for intuition. So now I recognize here that I am recommending books to you, which are obviously, books are an intellectual endeavor. And the irony here is I just got finished telling you that intuition is not about being in our head, it's about being in our body. So to this end, I would like to offer you something called the 5-day solo deep dive. The idea here is if you sign up for the deep dive, each day for 5 days, you will get an email from me containing a short lesson, but more importantly, an experiment or a challenge or an exercise that you can do that day. And it will be a very fun, very practical, applicable way for you to really explore your own intuition and therefore really be developing your own intuition. So if this is something that sounds like an avenue that you would like to pursue, definitely go ahead and sign up for that 5-day deep dive. I think you'll find it to be a lot of fun, and it's obviously no commitment. You don't have to do any of the exercises, but if nothing else, it'll give you a different way of thinking about your own intuition and how it might show up in your day-to-day life. So I think you'll enjoy it, and I would definitely enjoy having you participate in that. So that's it for this week's Intentional Tuesdays. As always, I hope you found it interesting. I hope you got a lot out of it. Next week, we will wrap up this entire intuition series with, I probably won't have a video next week. It'll just be the written summary of the last 3 weeks worth of content. I know a lot of people prefer to have the written version rather than just the videos. So that'll be your reference there, and there'll be a lot of additional readings and references that you can follow up on should you be interested in learning more. I'll give you some additional ideas for how to take your intuitive studies even deeper. As always, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. And until our paths cross again in the future, I wish you all the best and prosperous journey. Take care.